We are very happy to be back to talk to you all again and do our semi-annual habitat update. Normally we talk to you about wind and offshore energy and oil and gas and such, but since you have a separate presentation on wind and the mitigation policy was something that you were interested in, we're going to do things a little differently this time and focus on those things. So we'll talk a little bit about the mitigation policy, a little bit about what's going on with climate and coastal storm risk management projects and coastal resilience, and a quick update on infrastructure and ports. And then Peter will jump in with aquaculture. So as I said, there's been no new activity offshore on the oil and gas leasing or cables. So as Jessica mentioned, this past May, NOAA released a draft mitigation policy for public comment. Comments are open until July 12th, and a copy was in your briefing package. So before I go into some of the relevant details on the policy itself, there's a little bit of background on our current landscape with mitigation. We have a number of multiple authorities, such as the Endangered Species Act, Magnuson-Stevens with the FH, Federal Power Act, and others. And there's a whole bunch of different guidance documents out there, some from the Army Corps, some from EPA, Fish and Wildlife Service, but we never really had a cohesive policy of our own. And that's what this draft mitigation policy is attempting to do. So what we're trying to do here is have this overarching framework for our policy and then an associated community of practice that is going to be shared among all of the mitigation practitioners within NOAA so that we can provide some consistency and resources for other programs within NOAA besides the Habitat Office. So why do we need this policy? Well, it's to support appropriate mitigation for impacts to our resources, ones that fully offset the losses and address the issues specific to coastal environments, because a lot of the guidance that's out there from other agencies deals with their mandates and their species, not necessarily ours. We're looking to kind of standardize the practices as appropriate and share information across the nation on best mitigation practices, create that overarching framework, and improve communication within our agency on mitigation. So what are the goals? As I said, the goals are to offset the losses and achieve the purposes and objectives of our authorities and programs. And that ranges from, essential fish habitat to protected resources to natural resource damage assessment actions. We want to sustain vibrant coastal communities and economies by aligning the mitigation with the landscape and seascape conservation objectives, and help action agencies like the Army Corps of Engineers, who issues a lot of permits that require mitigation, as well as the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and others, to develop these appropriate mitigation measures. And we also want to provide a consistent, effective, and transparent mitigation process. So the policy is fairly simple, and it includes 8 or so just statements. And those are applying the mitigation sequence appropriately. And that mitigation sequence is avoid, then minimize, and then compensate or offset for the losses. We want to use the best scientific information that's available. We want to promote strategies with a high probability of success. We want to consider climate change and climate resilience when we're evaluating and developing these mitigation measures. And we want to collaborate with our agency partners and stakeholders. We want to get the best mitigation outcome that we can possibly get. So there's a couple of statements in our policy that are more coastal focused, and that's what makes it a little different than some of what the other agencies might have. One is to apply a landscape or seascape approach when we look at appropriate compensatory mitigation, and that's the offset for the loss. We want to implement mitigation that is proportional to the impacts to our resources and that fully offsets that impact. We also want to look at preservation of intact habitats as compensation appropriately, taking into account habitats that are high risk in our rapidly developing coast and marine landscapes. Preservation is a kind of a sticky subject because we don't get a replacement for what's lost. So we really want to make sure that we apply it in an appropriate way. So that's what I had on the mitigation policy. And I'm going to roll right into coastal resilience. And it's a pretty short section. And it's just to make you all aware that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has a number of coastal storm risk management studies that are either underway or they're in various stages of development. And they're all looking at protecting coastal areas from coastal storms and flooding. And I have a list on the screen of the ones that are active. Ones that you should be aware of are the New York, New Jersey Harbor and Tributaries Study, the New Jersey Back Bays Study, and Nassau County Back Bays. Nassau County and New Jersey are two that you may see feasibility studies coming out this summer. NOAA is a cooperating agency on a lot of these NEPA documents, and we have to be per some conditions in the Water Resources Development Act of, I think it's 2016. But the Army Corps has to consult with us under the ESA, the Endangered Species Act, the Magnuson-Stevens Act, and the Fish and Wildlife Coordination Act. So we're involved in all of these projects. Some of the potential measures that go into these coastal storm risk management studies, these are things that the Corps is looking at doing with their non-federal partner. It's usually the states. So New Jersey Back Bays is the state of New Jersey. Rhode Island, it's the state of Rhode Island. These are some of the measures that they're considering, and they run everything from elevating structures to building bulkheads and seawalls to storm surge barriers and cross bay barriers to natural and nature-based solutions, which can include wetlands restoration and breakwaters and living shorelines. One of the things that's kind of tied into that, but is also a very emerging issue, is coastal resiliency using dredged materials. And we are seeing a lot of projects either coming in for permits or being incorporated as part of these coastal storm risk management studies, or coming in for grant applications. And that's to use dredged material to either restore a marsh by elevating its surface or supplementing its edge, creating living shorelines, restoring or creating new islands, and then your typical beach nourishment. And it's a little complicated in the process because there's a lot of differing opinions on what makes a good project. If we're placing dredged material on a marsh, what's a degraded marsh? Is it a marsh that needs this sediment? How much sediment? How far out should the shoreline go? What are the habitat trade-offs? And then what do we feel is success, and how do we monitor that? So this is something that you'll see a lot of happening in the Mid-Atlantic, the New Jersey Back Bays, Maryland, the Chesapeake Bay, Virginia. It's something that we're all wrestling with, but it has a great opportunity to do some great things for our wetlands that are not keeping pace with sea level rise, as long as we do it in a thoughtful manner. Infrastructure and port development, the Habitat and Ecosystem Services Division and the Habitat Conservation Division in CIRO, we see a lot of these things. And some of the big projects that are ongoing, coming down the pike, and things that we're involved with include North Carolina Highway 12. The task force is being reinstituted to look at ways to make that highway more resilient. The Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel is looking at, is installing another tunnel. We have deepening of the channels and improvements of the channels in Baltimore and New York to move goods more quickly and better accommodating those bigger ships. We have a proposal for another bridge to cross over the Chesapeake into Annapolis from the Eastern Shore. And there's a number of port proposals along the Delaware River that our staff is involved with. And we also expect to see more port development proposals due to offshore wind development. We just don't really know where they're going to be yet. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Peter Burns, and he will fill you in on aquaculture.
Thank you, Karen, and good afternoon,
Karen.
everybody.
Hey, Peter, before you go, I was really curious if I could just ask Karen a quick question or two.
Of course.
Regarding those comments that she had on our last slide, before we jump into aquaculture, and maybe we can take a pause and ask some questions. I'm really interested in not only Chesapeake Bay. So you said that there's a plan for a new tunnel for the Chesapeake Bay Bridge.
I believe they're working on it now.
Okay. Where would that, so what would be the purpose to that, a new tunnel?
But it's to add capacity to the existing.
I see.
Correct.
Because right now there are two tunnels. And I was really curious, given that I live in Annapolis and I have to deal with, the fight every weekend around the Bay Bridge. So there is discussion about another crossing, and where would that crossing be?
They are looking at now. They're in the early stages of evaluating alternatives for a new crossing.
South of the one that we have now, or north?
They haven't decided yet. So
Okay.
there were 7 alternatives they looked at, and they've kind of narrowed it down to north or south.
Okay.
That route hasn't been picked. So they're in the early stages of that process.
Okay. No, I was just curious when I heard that. I haven't heard either of those comments before, and I appreciate your thoughts. So I'll leave it be there. We'll go ahead to Peter, and then I'm sorry to jump in, but it just kind of it piqued my interest hearing about those different comments there. So let's go to Peter, and then we'll take questions and comments from the council. Go ahead, Peter.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
Thank you, and Karen, I'll ask you to forward the slides if you don't mind, so you can maintain control of the
Let me do that.
presentation. Great. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Pete Burns. I'm the chief of our Ecosystems Management branch in our Habitat and Ecosystem Services division in Garfo. And our branch supports the coordination of the aquaculture activities in our region. Today, I'm going to provide a brief update on aquaculture projects in the region and on the aquaculture opportunity areas. Next slide, please, Karen.
All right, hold on.
There we go.
I'm sorry.
Great, that's it. That's my slide. Okay, so the first thing I'll touch on is the aquaculture projects update. There are 3 projects right now in the Greater Atlantic region that are under various stages of review. The one most pertinent to the Mid-Atlantic Council is the Manna Fish Farms project off of Long Island, New York. That project is in the pre-application phase, and many of you may have attended the pre-application meeting that was held back in September of 2020. The Manna Fish Farms proposal is looking at cultivation of steelhead trout and black sea bass. And during the pre-application meeting in September, we solicited comments to the EPA and the Corps of Engineers on site alternatives and a biological baseline ecological assessment. And those comments came in May. So those are under review right now. And Manna has not submitted a full application yet to EPA or the Corps of Engineers yet. There are 2 projects that have permit applications that have been submitted. One is the Blue Water Fisheries LLC project off the coast of New Hampshire and Massachusetts. That's proposing steelhead trout operation. The EPA and the Corps have received the applications back in late January of 2021. And we expect the Corps to announce a public notice soon to declare that application complete, potentially, and to identify the type of NEPA review that will be needed for that project. And then there's the Salem State University project. This is an ongoing project involving long lines to propagate blue mussels off the coast of Massachusetts. The Corps of Engineers received the application back in December of 2019. This is an expansion from 3 to 20 long lines on the original site that was proposed. And the Corps of Engineers is working with the applicant, Salem State, to obtain the additional information to be able to identify what they need for an Endangered Species Act consultation. Excuse me. Next slide, please. So that's the project update, and I'll just take a moment to update folks on the aquaculture opportunity areas. These are something that the council has probably had a lot of experience with. You've been updated on this quite a bit, but I thought it'd be worthwhile to let you know where we are on this. As you know, the AOAs were established under the executive order for promoting American seafood competitiveness and economic growth. And they're intended to expand economic opportunities in coastal communities and increase the nation's food security. And the aquaculture opportunity areas are areas that show high potential for commercial aquaculture, balancing user conflict and environmental concerns and industry growth. And so those, the executive order sets forth a process for establishing these aquaculture opportunity areas based with highly weighted on public comment and spatial data that's available, and the best available science and public input. So the intent is to find the appropriate areas for sustainable aquaculture that minimize interactions with other users, such as shipping and fishing. And the EO establishes a recurring process over the next several years to identify 2 geographic regions, roughly annually, that are suitable for aquaculture, and identify locations for AOAs within those areas through public input and spatial analysis to get information on the geographic regions that should be selected in the future. So next slide is AOA timeline. I think we're on slide 16, please. There we go. Great. So just a sort of a recap on the timeline of how this AOA process began. So we started with the publication of the executive order back in May of 2020. And then in August of 2020, the Fisheries Service used existing spatial data and analysis and public input to identify the first 2 regions to establish aquaculture opportunity areas. And those areas were the Gulf of Mexico and off the coast of Southern California. Then in October of 2020, NIMS published a request for information to solicit comments to inform the locations of those of aquaculture opportunity areas within those 2 regions, and to inform decisions on future regions for aquaculture opportunity areas. And so in response to that request for information, we had a mix of support and opposition for locating those, the aquaculture opportunity areas in the Gulf of Mexico and in Southern California. But overall, the Fisheries Service did receive some effective and valuable input on potential locations for aquaculture opportunity areas within those regions. And then the second part of the request for information was really looking at what regions to identify AOAs in the future. And so there was general opposition for AOAs in New England, in Oregon, and in Washington. And there was some support for it in Alaska, Florida, the US Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and in the Western Pacific. Next slide, please, Karen. So the next steps for areas 1 and 2. So this fall, the Fisheries Service will publish a notice of intent to prepare a programmatic environmental impact statement for these first 2 aquaculture opportunity areas. And so our Southeast and West Coast regions will take the lead on establishing those environmental impact statements to kind of look at all the data that's available and present some options for where those aquaculture opportunity areas could be located in those areas and provide opportunities for public comment. And of course, we'll do that. There'll also be information from the National Ocean Service's National Center for Coastal Ocean Science, which is taking the lead on developing an aquaculture opportunity atlas that looks at all the different available spatial data and best available science to be able to help inform the locations for aquaculture opportunity areas, given all the different conflicts and resources in these areas. Next slide, please. So the next step for future AOAs. NOAA Fisheries, our Office of Aquaculture, will continue to review the comments from the request for information on where to locate AOAs in the future. We didn't receive any comments from the Mid-Atlantic in response to that request for information, but there was, as I mentioned earlier, there was primarily opposition for an AOA in the Northeast at this time, and that was based mostly on potential conflicts with wind planning, with the lobster industry that's prevalent in the New England area, and concerns about endangered right whales, although we did get one comment in support of aquaculture opportunity areas in the Northeast region. So the Office of Aquaculture will work with the regional offices in the future to and look at public comment that we received to define opportunities and challenges for establishing AOAs in the various regions. And so NIMS will announce this fall which regions were selected for AOAs for regions 3 and 4 based on the input we got from the request for information. And then there'll be another RFI later in the year to get input on where to locate the AOAs in those regions, and then to get input on what the declaration for AOAs in regions 5 and 6. So the process keeps moving forward. Next slide, please. And so just to remind the council partners, as we move forward with this AOA process, there are a lot of opportunities for the council to engage and for the public to engage throughout this process. A lot of what we're talking about now is not really prevalent to what the Mid-Atlantic Council, the region that the council is concerned with. A lot of it is, of course, the Gulf of Mexico and Southern California, but this is a recurring process. So throughout this process, there are opportunities for commenting, and that's when the National Center for Coastal Ocean Science is gathering data for spatial analysis. They'll be looking for any kind of data and comments on that. During the public comment for the request for information. So the council will have that opportunity this fall when we go out with the second RFI. And also when the Aquaculture Opportunity Atlas is published, there'll be an opportunity for comment. And when the notice of intent to prepare the programmatic EIS is published with the preliminary alternatives for the locations of the AOAs in regions 1 and 2, but then again, in the future, we'll have that opportunity for the other regions that are identified. And when the programmatic EIS is published for public comment, there'll be a chance to comment, and also when the final PEIS comes out and there's information on the selected alternatives. So lots of opportunities there. And anyway, I hope this is informative to the council, and happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you very much, Peter, and thanks, Karen, for your presentation. I might turn to Chris Moore just quickly. Chris, have you and Jessica and staff been talking about where we can engage in this comment period? It seems like there's a lot of opportunity for us to provide comment, including today, but I want to just touch base with you, since we haven't talked about this before, just to make sure it's on your radar and on staff's radar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, it is, and we have. And actually, you can take a look at some of the steps that we've taken and some of the things that we've done. If you take a look at our aquaculture page on the website. Okay. Jose is the principal staffer tracking this for me, so he's attended some of the meetings that Peter referenced, and we've been actually tracking it through the CCC meetings and NRCC meetings as well. So yeah, we're on top of it.
Okay, great. I assume so. I wanted to put that out there on the record. Mike Penny, you have your hand up. Did you have a question for Peter or Karen? Oh,
nope.
Okay, hand went down.
From before. That
was probably, yeah, from before. Let me look to other council members before I go to the public. Is there anyone from the council that has any questions for Peter or Karen Ellen Boland. Go ahead, Ellen.
Thank you. I think I heard correctly that Peter was saying that the aquaculture stuff is based off of the EO, which I believe is the executive order from the previous administration. Has there been any conversation about how or if the current administration is going to revise or address this EO, or have you all gotten signals that this is going to stay as is? Thanks.
Thanks, Ellen. Peter?
Yes, thank you for the question. That's a good point. Yes, it was the previous administration that established this, the process for the EOs. I'm sorry, for the AOAs. But to my knowledge, there hasn't been any discussion about revoking that or changing course on the policy. That it may be a topic of discussion at the higher levels of the administration, but nothing that I'm aware of.
All right, thanks, Peter. I want to go next to Peter Defer for question or comment. Yep, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Peter and Karen, for the presentations. I just wanted to let the council members know that we have been doing a fair amount of coordination with New England over such issues as not only wind, but also aquaculture. So our staff and their staff have, they are joined at the hip over these sort of things. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Appreciate that. Is there anyone else from the council that has anything they want to ask of Karen or Peter regarding the presentation? Or Jessica, as far as habitat goes? All right, I don't see any other hands at this time. Let's go out to the public. James Fletcher. Go ahead, James. All right, James, it looks like you're off of mute now, so go ahead and see if you can. You might have to unmute your device as well. If you're on the phone, you can hit *6. James, if you're speaking, we can't hear you. I'm sorry. Or at least I can't.
I can't hear him either.
Yeah.
Oh.
Let's give him another second. He was able to communicate earlier. It must be something with the device he's using that's hanging him up. Is there while Mr. Fletcher is figuring out his audio and his issues, is there anyone else from the audience that would like to make any comment at this time, or have any questions for Karen, Peter, or Jessica? Willie Goldsmith, go ahead, Willie.
Thanks, Mike. Can you hear me?
Yep, we got you.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much for the presentation. I just had a quick question about the steelhead, and just this might be kind of coming a bit late in the game, but we've been following the federal aquaculture work and the AOAs, and
yeah,
we've heard multiple times how NOAA's policy, really their aquaculture policy back from 2011, really relies on or prioritizes the use of only native or naturalized species unless the best available science demonstrates use of non-native or other species would not cause undue harm, et cetera, et cetera. And I just wanted to affirm that kind of work is part of the process with these steelhead farms. Certainly, that's one of the major concerns that we've been hearing as part of the overall dialogue on a federal level about non-native species. So I was just wondering if it might be possible to provide some more detail at this time on that.
Yeah. Let me turn to Peter and Karen if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a good question, an interesting one. I think so NOAA is looking at things and not permitting anything, but we're going through our routine process through consultations with the EFH and for the Endangered Species Act. It's the Environmental Protection Agency and the Corps of Engineers that provide the permits. And so I know that the EPA permits look a lot at the issue of escapees and genetic issues that could occur with escapement and things like that with any kind of cultured species. So those types of things are being considered throughout the issuance of the permit and the process that happens with that.
All right, thanks, Peter. Willie, did you have any follow-up on that?
No, that's all at this time. Like, I just think that is a major concern, I think, for fisheries stakeholders across sectors. Yeah. And so any outreach kind of communicating that, because we've heard, we know that NOAA's Office of Aquaculture has made efforts to engage the rec community, and as well as the commercial community. And it seemed a little bit more black and white that non-native and that non-native or naturalized species would generally not be supported. So a little bit more clarity there, and recognizing there are multiple levels of permitting here, but just from an outreach perspective, that would be helpful. Thanks.
Right.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, if I can jump in real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's a valid point. And I think that in the consideration of steelhead trout being one of the species potentially to be raised here, I think that those issues are going to be taken into consideration. And I'm not sure what the rationale is for allowing that, whether it's a genetic issue with steelhead that might make them less susceptible to problems from escapement or things like that. I think that was probably considered. Unfortunately, I don't have the details on that, but that's something, as I said, would be considered throughout the environmental review, both on NOAA fisheries side and through the EPA permitting process. But certainly the comment is well noted. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Thanks, Willie. I see Jose from council staff has his hand up. Do you have something you want to offer, Jose?
Yeah, just for the benefit of the council members, the animals that they're planning to use at the Manna Farm, the steelhead trout, they're sterile animals, so there is no chance for reproduction there.
Okay. All right, that's good information. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to try Mr. Fletcher again. James, were you able to figure out your audio? It doesn't sound like it. We can't hear you if you're speaking. I'm sorry. Maybe you can put something in the chat. If you have a question, if you put it in the chat, we can try to address it. And Willie, your hand's still up. If you can put your hand down, if you don't have anything else to offer at this time, that would be helpful. All right, James, I'm sorry we couldn't hear you, but we'll try to address your concern if you can type it into us. Is there anybody? I'm going to take it back to anyone else from the audience have any questions on this presentation? All right, seeing none, I'm going to bring it back to the council, and I'll ask one last time, is there anybody that has any comment or question that they'd like to offer at this point regarding the presentation from Karen and Peter? All right, seeing none. Karen, Peter, thank you so much for being patient with us. I know we were a little over our time limitations, and you had to hang in there and probably listen to something that you didn't really want to listen to as you sat there and participated with us, during our deliberations over unmanaged commercial landings. Thanks for your presentation, and I'll work with Chris and with staff to provide to come up with a plan for how we're going to provide comment on certain things. I appreciate, but I do appreciate you being with us today. And so that concludes our business under this agenda item. I would like to take a 5-minute break so everybody can get up for a minute Let's come back. Let's see what time it is.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so we have one more issue very quickly. Jessica.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a draft letter that she's going to discuss very quickly.
Oh, yeah. That's right. I'm sorry. I forgot about that.
Yep.
So Jessica, do you want to talk about that draft letter?
I can. So very quickly, behind that tab, there's a one-page letter that the council staff drafted. It's from the perspective that the staff, after reading the policy, was very supportive of getting this policy approved. It was developed over 4 years with the with representation from all of the NOAA regions. So if council members are supportive of submitting a letter, you could get comments to me by June 30th, and then we can incorporate those comments into a final letter and submit that to the service by the July 12th deadline.
Okay, Chris and Jessica, has that letter been sent out? So that, I mean, I know that it's in the briefing documentation, but has that letter been sent out individually to council members for a comment?
We can do that.
Yeah, we did not do that yet. We could. It's in the briefing.
Yeah, I think if you sent that letter out to the council and asked and provided a deadline for comment, I think that would be helpful.
Will do.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and I'm sorry, I missed that in my notes. I apologize. I was trying to speed things up a little bit, but Jessica, is there anything else that you need from us today on habitat updates?
Nope, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for being here with us today, and Karen and others. Thanks for Karen and Peter. Thanks for being here with us. We're gonna take it's 3:30. Let's take, I think 5 minutes is probably fine. Let's just take a quick 5-minute break, and we'll come back to offshore wind updates at 3:35, if that's okay with everyone. Hopefully we can wrap things up within an hour or so, and I appreciate all your patience. Thank you. Be back at 3:35.